Welcome to MRII's Insights and Innovators podcast, where we talk to top market research professionals to get their inside stories about innovative and enduring best practices. Today's episode is sponsored by Full Circle. Named the Panel Company of the Year, Full Circle is a leading provider of high-quality online insight, leveraging survey experience, advanced tech, flexible community strategies, and unparalleled quality controls. We give you immediate access to proven data for better insights. Now, here's your host for today's episode.
I'm John Last, President of Sports and Leisure Research Group and past President of the Insights Association and Marketing Research Institute International. On today's episode, I'm pleased to welcome one of the industry's true legends and visionaries. Simon Chadwick's career highlights include building and running some of the industry's most successful market research firms, leading industry associations, and advising countless organizations in the insight space on growth strategies and navigating the dynamic environment within which we compete. Today, we're going to candidly assess the most dynamic shifts and future realities for success in our profession, with a focus on pragmatic strategies for staying ahead of the curve and continuing to provide value for our clients and organizations. Welcome, Simon. Great to have you on Insights, Innovators and Insights.
Thank you very much, John. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Absolutely. I want to start by talking a little bit about, we've both been at this for a long time, and I'd love to get your perspective on where the industry is today and what's different when it comes to the shape and essential focus that insights providers need to subscribe to.
I think the industry is a different place than from when you and I entered it. I mean, we still are doing the same. We're still after the same goal, which is to get insights that are accurate and meaningful and have impact from people at the right time, in the right place. It's essentially being a fount of knowledge and understanding for organizations, corporations, politicians, whatever it may be. But the way in which the industry is now structured and the way in which it does it is so different. I suspect, though I don't want to impute an age for you, John, but I suspect that when you came into the industry, the average project took, 10 weeks, 12 weeks?
Yeah, probably similar to that.
Now it's about a day, 2 days, 3 days if it's a long one.
Yeah.
And everything is about speed. We have had an enormous amount of money invested in the industry from venture capital primarily, probably in the order, certainly north of $60 billion. Which was unheard of even just over a decade ago. And the ownership of the industry has changed dramatically. So, whereas we had big companies owning research agencies, or we had private ownership, families, for example, today 75% of it is owned by private equity.
Yeah.
So that changes again what the aims of the ownership are, what the aims of the industry are. So it's the same need, but a very, very different industry that's actually meeting that need.
And I think it's also changed certainly has changed for us on the client side as well. Having had the distinction of being on the client side initially before starting my company, you can see it from a full 360. You had some interesting comments in the Insight Association's 2024 industry report about C-suite amnesia. I'd love for you to kind of reflect on that a little bit for our listeners, what that means and why it's a critical success factor for today's insights professional.
Well, it's an interesting story, really. When I first came to this country in 1991, the first conference I went to was called the Research Industry Leaders Forum. You may have even been there.
Yeah.
And it consisted of the heads of research functions in major corporations complaining to each other that they didn't have a seat at the table.
Yeah.
And then, over time, more and more functions began to have a seat at the table. 10% in 2008, 20% in 2015. Today, it's around 35%, which is all good. But what really happened was, that was magnificent, apart from the fact that it was caused by COVID, was during COVID, according to the stakeholders dependent upon research, the functions in their companies behaved phenomenally well, performed phenomenally well. The ARF had a study at that point, and I think it was 2021 and 2023, showing that the feeling was that in the C-suite that we had materially positively affected the financial outcomes of their companies. And we got our seat at the table, because essentially managements needed to know what was going on, then they needed to know how they were going to compete, what was going to happen in the future. We came through. Go forward to 2024 and 2023, and you see layoffs starting to occur. Why? Because essentially the C-suites were saying, well, we don't need all these people in insights. That's past us. Let's go back to normal. And that's what I mean by amnesia. They've forgotten just how powerful and how impactful the insights functions were.
Was it strictly, do you feel, I mean, clearly it wasn't strictly in the C-suite. It may have just been a continuation of what we saw back at that initial conference, that maybe there just wasn't enough proactivity from the insights leaders within those organizations to assert why they should have that seat. I don't know if you would agree with that.
No, I don't think I would, because we ran the third iteration of the Insights Maturity Study for the Insights Association and the Market Research Society. That was the end of last year. We reported on it at the beginning of this. And essentially, you could see that there was a great deal of proactivity going on, particularly in areas such as deliverables, in terms of being very much involved right across the spectrum of the organization, in widening the definition of stakeholders, all sorts of areas where they were being very, very proactive. I'm not saying that all
right
were being, but it was a very significant amount.
Yeah, I guess maybe the easy, kind of push button thought would be that it's driven by the whole AI phenomenon. I joke that if we had $1,000 for every industry presentation, article, or prognostication that talked about AI disrupting or blowing up traditional marketing research, both of us could buy the largest mansions next to each other on the Italian Riviera. It might not be a bad idea, actually, at some point. But at the risk of oversimplifying things, I think I know I still subscribe in many ways to a belief that good research remains about extracting the right information from the right stakeholders in a considered way. And we've all seen so many shiny new toys come and go. From your vantage point, what's hype and what's real, both short term and medium term?
That's a really good question. I mean, I think there are some very, very interesting developments. Qualitative at scale, that's a really interesting one. In as much as it would, if successful, it would redefine the boundaries, if there are boundaries between quantitative and qualitative.
Right.
And, rethink the story behind the research. I say if it's successful, because you can't just leave things to artificial intelligence to do. We've already shown that artificial intelligence can do analysis, but it can't tell stories. We need those humans to do that. So I don't know that it's. I think there are some very interesting developments. I think that first-party owners, for example, like Walmart and Kroger, are beginning to really influence the way in which research is done. And I believe that, yes, there are areas that perhaps are not as shiny as they should be, or not, certainly don't perform as they look as if they should. But the interesting thing about this whole influx of money is that we've now got what? I don't know, 500 companies that weren't here 5 to 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And there was I won't name him, but there was a guy who came into the industry about 10 years ago, founding a company, and he said at the conference, the problem with you researchers, you don't know effing about technology, and the problem with us technologies is we don't know effing about research. And he built the success of his company by merging those understandings. And I think those who succeed will do exactly that. There are plenty who are falling by the wayside. But that's what we're going through. It's trying to get that understanding between what technology can do and what human beings can do.
Yeah, it goes back to a point you made a few moments ago about telling stories, and something that I've long espoused, which is about being consultative. I used to jokingly, only somewhat jokingly, use a line in some of the organizations I worked in, that the only difference between my group or my company was and a McKinsey company, with no offense intended towards McKinsey, was that we charged about $1 million less per project, and it kind of reflects what really has been the evolution of what an insights department needs to do to turn that data into vibrant stories and have the courage to make actionable recommendations for clients, whether internal or external. What other critical success factors are there now? You hinted at speed. What's going on today in terms of really adding value?
I think I don't know that speed adds value, probably does. And you're quite right about the storytelling aspect, which is getting better and better. I think it's also about spreading those stories across the organization so that everybody, democratizing the insights that we're putting out. But I think one of the areas that is really interesting right now is the integration of data and insight production areas, if you like. So we've seen a great fragmentation over the last 10 or 15 years. Stuff that you and I would have lumped into research has now got its own area. So, we now have CX, which we used to call customer satisfaction, UX, we used to call product research, and all of those sorts of things. We're now beginning to see a reintegration, if you like. And further integration. So we're seeing the rise of data analytics. Indeed, a lot of the information that companies use at the moment is built off of things like Salesforce and HubSpot and God knows what. But we're also seeing pure play analytics coming in very, very strongly. And we're seeing DIY research. I'm not such a fan of that, but we're seeing that as very much so. And then we've got the consultative side. And these are all beginning to come together again under the same roof. And I say beginning because it's certainly not a majority of companies are doing that, but it is a momentum that is going on. And if that is successful, if that takes hold and stays, then I think insights can actually have a huge impact on the organizations for which they work.
It certainly is an exciting thought as we look to the future with that in mind, and considering some of the other aspects of how the industry is evolving and continuing to be held accountable in different ways. A lot of people listening to the series are kind of looking towards how to enhance their own careers. What, from your perspective, do you see as the essential skills that those who are going to be leading research agencies in the future need to have today? And how's that different from where we were 15 years ago?
Well, Ian Lewis and I wrote the first part of a book, 10, 11 years ago, called Marketing Research. And in it, we posited the idea that the insights functions of the future would be composed of 3 types of people. Specialists, of whom we need more and more and more, because things like social listening, for example, um, providing streams of data, which then need to be synthesized. So the ability to synthesize is becoming hugely important. And people need to be able to understand that synthesis and analysis are not the same thing. Analysis is about one data set being broken down. Synthesis is a number of data sets being put together. And I think then what we said, and I think is still true, is you need polymaths to actually connect the dots and work out what's important and work out what the story is. And either those polymaths can carry that story forward into the C-suite, or consultants can, not of the McKinsey type,
Right.
but consultants within that function, the head of the function. And we've seen now, it's again just a few examples, but we are seeing heads of insights functions who have this multifaceted structure being elevated to the C-suite itself.
Right.
So Michelle Gansler, for example, at McDonald's, God bless her, she's a pioneer getting in there.
Yeah.
So those three types of people are exactly what we need, and it's up to you to be able to choose which way do I really want to go. Am I a polymath? Can I synthesize? Is that something I should really look at? Do I want to have a specialism, or do I actually want to learn how to be a consultant?
How does that, just to kind of wrap up and thinking about where the industry is going 10 years from now, how does that translate to somebody perhaps earlier in their career in terms of the skills that they need to be bringing in, or the aspects of the business world that they need to focus on?
Well, I think in the latter part of your question, focusing on business skills and how business works, I think is absolutely fundamental. We do a lot of training on how to become a consultant. We call it Journey from Researcher to Consultant. And I ask a question in these sessions: how many of you have actually read your company's annual report? And about 2 or 3 hands go up. How many of you have actually listened into the investor presentation? Nobody, apart from maybe one person, the leader. You have to understand business if you wish to be a consultant. You have to have that wrapping, if you like.
Yeah.
And then you have to, I'm sorry to say it, but you have to be trained as to how to be a consultant. There are things that are important in terms of how you approach it. So I think if you want to reach the pinnacle of your career inside insights, I think you're going to have to take those classes, or be trained in those areas in order to be able to activate what you're good at as a researcher.
I can't disagree at all. It's kind of like I often said to people before I owned my own company, I always felt like I owned the company I worked for, because that was the way to have that holistic understanding of what the impact could be of what you were delivering. It's good advice. And with that, we have reached the end of our time today. I always feel when we chat, we could talk for a couple of hours, but we want to keep this within the confines of the podcast. So thank you so much for joining us today, Simon, and thank you all for listening.
Thank you, John.
Thanks for joining MRII's Insights and Innovators podcast. Be sure to subscribe and listen to all of our podcast episodes, and visit us at mrii.org for more insights from market research professionals.